Hi, this is Rachel, a radical soul untangled. Well, I figured since I'm offering my services as reading tarot, and I have mentioned that I have several tarot decks, figure I'd give you a quick spread of my actual tarot decks, as well as a comparison, so you can kind of get a feel for the different energies that come from each deck. And I figured the best, most iconic card to start with, everybody's favorite to freak out over, is Death. Death is represented by the number 13, my lucky number because I was born on the 13th. And first we're going to start with Universal Weight Tarot deck. So this is generally what people think of, the imagery they think of when they think of tarot. This isn't necessarily the first tarot deck ever, but it was definitely the most popularized. So if we look at the Death card here, we see that is very death-oriented. We see a knight in black armor on a pale horse. Skull, it's a skeleton, holding a black flag with the number 13, a white rose. It's a Tudor rose. I think this might have to do something with the War of the Roses. We see a fallen king, his crown on the ground. We see a clerical figure begging death. We see like a mother and child on their knees before death. We see a setting sun between two towers. And so it's, some people can see this as a very grim card, because generally though in tarot, death is about ending the old, the end of an old cycle, to have a new beginning. It's basically saying you have to purge the old to get rid of the new. But this deck has very much a, I feel like this is one of the deathiest death cards, if you can say that. But it also just shows like nothing lasts forever. Like a king fallen, his crown off, you know, and that death spares no one, not the child, not the mother, not the holy figure. Death comes for us all in the end. So it has more that kind of feel to it, you know, the ending of an empire between those two towers. Some people even say the river in the background is like could be the river Styx. So so that's the more traditional look of death. This is from the new Mythic Tarot, and I love this deck. It has a very Greek mythology theme to it. So this, the Death card, the helmeted figure is Hades, and that literally is the river Styx behind him. Again, we have the setting sun imagery, you know, the end of a era, the end of a day. But with that end, you know, even though you see the sun setting, you know the sun's going to rise again. So I feel like that sunset is more prominent. And again, you have, you know, people on their knees before death, except for the child. The child actually doesn't seem to fear death, whereas the adult figures are offering power and riches, and the child is just offering another gift of life. The child has nothing to offer death but life, and the child is not afraid of death. So I think that's very interesting. You see the parched land on one side where death is, but beyond that you see a fertile new land. So again, the promise of rebirth is in this card. So that's that one. And then this is the Crow Tarot. And this one's pretty much like based on the Rider Waite deck, but it's you know, just its own imagery. It's a little more deconstructed, and of course there's a crow theme. So there's elements of air, flight, and this one's very much a death and rebirth kind of imagery. You see the definitely dead bird has feathers on the ground. He won't fly again. You see a skeleton, but you see what is implied to be a spirit, you know, flying up. So there's a new beginning. There's a transition here as well. And I have the poppies in the background representing I would say blood, lifeblood, you know, as the crow has lost its lifeblood to the earth. It's been absorbed by the flowers to give new life. And again, death is number 13 in the major arcana of tarot. Next we have the Chakra Wisdom Tarot. I really love this deck. They color code all the cards to correspond with chakras, and it's just it's very well done, very clever, very helpful way to read energies. And here again we have kind of like the death and rebirth, but instead of the the new life being a little more on the ghostly side, we have the death figure. The figure being left behind is ghostly. She's hiding in the trees. She has kind of like a shaded look in her eyes, and this is the new figure moving on to the future, radiant with light, glowing, a new confidence, a beautiful headdress. She knows her power and her worth. She's left behind. Maybe feelings of worthlessness, old images of herself, old stories about herself. She's left them behind, and she's walking into a new future, and she's not looking back. She has her back turned on this figure. This figure's kind of looking at us saying, don't forget me. And she's going like, nah, I forgot you. I don't need you anymore. I don't need to carry the memory of you with me. It's what I get from this. And now we have the more abstract versions of death here. So the next 3 decks. So this is from the Wildwood Tarot, and so this has a very Celtic, shamanistic vibe to it. So if that kind of energy really speaks with you, resonates with you, this would be a good deck for you. To either have me read for you or to try out for yourself. And again, we know this one is death because it's number 13, but this one they chose to call it the journey. But again, we have very much the death imagery here. We have the raven stripping flesh off of the skull of a stag. And again, this one seems to be more dark. There's the moon and the crows circling, or the ravens circling around. And the trees have lost all their leaves, so they're dormant. So this one seems to emphasize more the fact that something is coming to an end rather than an end leading to a new beginning. But it is called the journey. So you could say this is the journey's end. I feel like that might be a more appropriate title for this card. But I think by calling it the journey and not the journey's end, that's their more subtle way of emphasizing that there is, more to come after the death part. But it does seem to kind of emphasize that there's a stripping away in death, stripping away of old things that no longer serve you. And actually the things that you leave behind might actually help others as they maybe are in a similar part that you were once in, and now you are able to use the lessons that you've learned from your past that you are leaving behind, but you still retain the memory of those, and you can use that to help others as the deer's body is feeding the ravens. Now we have these 2 angel decks, and told people, I'm like, these are very uplifting. So if you want a very positive, uplifting themed deck, this might be what you want to choose. Again, we know they're death because they're the number 13, and this one just calls it peace. So it is going, don't fight death, because I think the writer is probably even trying to avoid the word death, because that in and of itself kind of triggers a kind of emotional resistance. So I think they just are avoiding it altogether and saying peace, be at peace with this ending, release. So they say release the past, This is a more enriching future to come. Let go and let God. So this is just saying, you know, don't resist it. Again, because the word death kind of implies a resistance. Oh, I don't want to die. I don't want this to be the end just yet. I'm not ready for this to be the end. But by calling it peace, it just implies surrender. Surrender to the divine. To just surrendering to not control things that are beyond your control. And just let things that no longer serve you fall away from you. And this other Archangel deck, this one is, the first one is, this one's Archangel Power, and this one's called Archangel Wisdom. They're both by the same writer, but a different artist. So they are very similar, represented by the same Archangel and Azrael. And this one calls Release. So again, not invoking a visceral resistance to it by calling it death, trying to avoid that, I believe, is probably their intent. And you know, this one is showing imagery that is, instead of showing, so I think that his halo is also maybe representing the setting sun, and then moon imagery usually implies emotion or illusion. So perhaps as the sun sets, you see your past for what it was, the illusions that it was, the stories that you made up. So you're no longer in the illusion anymore. We have the two towers here, but they don't look like they're falling or crumbling away or anything like that. He has his hands out, you know, like in a surrender kind of motion. So unicorn with, what is that, Scorpio? Let's see, the Scorpio sign is very emotional, and it's a water sign. It's a fixed water sign. Can be a little shady. So I guess kind of showing how death is still a mysterious thing, but it's nothing to be afraid of. Look, there's a unicorn with a flowery wreath in a field of white flowers, roses. So yeah, nice, peaceful, not anything to be afraid of, not anything to fear. And again, we have release as the title instead of death. And again, it kind of gives a little flavor text here. Endings that lead to new beginnings, the need to release situations or people that hold you back. And this one emphasizes a more spiritual transformation theme. You know, because as you evolve spiritually, you will definitely experience multiple ego deaths. That's what they sometimes call them, where you might go through an intense emotional period. It seems to come out of nowhere, and then you just feel lighter. You feel freer because you've released a lot of emotional baggage, old stories that you've stayed stuck in for a long time that you realize only perpetuate your suffering. Like they served you at first to help heal your suffering, but now they keep you locked in a pattern, and you just gotta learn to let those patterns go. So this one has a more, you know, spiritual death kind of theme. But again, avoiding the word death to avoid that sense of resistance, to encourage people to be at peace and release. So anyway, just to give you an idea of just how different these cards can really be in the major arcana, especially of these various decks. And feel free to choose one that you like best, that seems to kind of resonate with you, especially if you like Greek mythology, if you really like Celtic shamanism, if you're familiar with the chakra system, or just want a clearer idea of what the energies are and how they correspond with points in your body. But if you kind of want, if you want very uplifting messages, like they're not going to be saccharine sweet. They're not saccharine sweet. They're not sugar coated, but they are reframing things in a much more positive light than what they may have traditionally be viewed as. If If you want a more traditional deck, definitely would go with these two. If you want a somewhat more objective kind of view. But yeah, all these decks have different energies. There's kind of different feels to them. And it's really beautiful. It's really fun reading the different decks. And you get slightly different messages from them based on the imagery and just the overall theme of the deck. So anyway, thanks again for listening, and I hope you had enjoyed this. I might make this a little series. I just figured I'd start with death because that is the card that everybody knows is in there and everybody kind of freaks out about. All right, now this is Rachel, Radical Soul Entangled. Thank you for your time, as always.